Hi, I'm Dan Robinson with the Great Lakes Spirituality Project, and have the privilege today of talking with Seamus Norgaard. Welcome, Seamus.
Well, I'm pleased to be here, Dan. Thanks.
Thanks for making the time. Seamus wears a lot of hats, including being the host and director of Tara's Meadow Retreat and Education Center on Beaver Isle in Lake Michigan, just off the coast from Petoskey, Michigan. The mission of Tara's Meadow is to educate, uplift, and interconnect our students and guests for their greater self-growth and empowerment, creativity, and ecological awareness in the service of all life on this planet. He also is the co-creator of and professor for North Central Michigan College's Environmental and Sustainability Studies program, and an old growth forest advocate participating in drafting the Natural Resource Management Plan for public lands on Beaver Isle. And on top of all that, he's taking on a new role soon as co-editor of the digital magazine Dysutopia, which was started by his friend Matt Schultz. You have a lot of irons in the fire there, Seamus.
Yeah, sometimes I forget what the right hand is doing.
But before we get into some of that work individually, I kind of want to ask you though, is there a through line, a theme that runs through all that work for you that kind of binds it all together?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and there is, it is a line of spirit. My father, who's passed away, took us up to the North Country in Minnesota, and this was long before the Boundary Waters was actually designated. And we'd load our family boat up with supplies, and we'd live 3 weeks on an island in Namakan Lakes. And so I think the through line there was waking up in the morning and hearing loon call and old canvas tents at that time, and really having that seeping awareness. I think that in life there are leaping awarenesses, sudden insights, and then there are also seeping awarenesses, and that is a through line that brought me to be interested in Indigenous cultures, nature, and my wild side. So I think you can find that in all the things I do. So
Okay.
there we go.
Yeah, that's all right. So you shared with me an interview you did with Matt Schultz in that digital magazine, Dysutopia, recently. So I want to steal a few sort of points from that. You talked about seeking for a sense of identity in place and an intuitive knowledge that our strength and survival emerge from being somewhere. What did you mean by that statement?
Oh boy, I think that might have been, I'm reflecting on that. That's kind of shared in the ethosphere with Matt too. We heard a quote recently that we didn't come into this planet. We grew out of it, and growing out of it, I think that sense of all my relations are there. The water, and that I swam in and ate the fish from in the Boundary Waters, the fragrance of the white pine. All these things are so deeply in my soul. And I'll just mention one other thing, that music. When I was camped in Ireland outside a conference in the Killarney Woods, it became clear to me that the music of my ancestors was onomatopoeic. It was resonant. It actually was the voice of the land itself. So I hope that goes a little ways to answering that question.
Well, I think it brings up a little bit of interest in your actual story. Now, the work that you do there at Tara's Meadow, as I understand it, combines a couple of the things, culturally speaking, that you've mentioned: Indigenous, Celtic. So tell me a little bit of the story. How did you get from the boundary waters of Minnesota as a child with your family to Beaver Island?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, Dan. I think the through line there was when I was in college, and I carried that sense of wild landscape and that love for it into college. It was a tumultuous time in terms of Native American consciousness. There was Alcatraz, the occupation of Alcatraz, where I went to school in Illinois. Mike Chosa was reclaiming, and his clan was reclaiming the lakeshore by treaty rights, an unused Great Lakes naval station for native use, and that was the through line or the truth with of the treaties, and that led to Wounded Knee, where which was really a civil rights and a sovereignty issue for the Lakota people. And I was, as a young college student, and I stood in horror. It's like many people have read "Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee," and I mean, the U.S. government had brought troops back from Vietnam and surrounded this little village of Wounded Knee, of essentially Indigenous people declaring, affirming their sovereignty. And I just couldn't see that happen again. You know what I mean? And so I was moved partly from that sense of identity with living with the wild, and how I associated Indigenous people, First Nation peoples here. I was moved to go out and take supplies, break through the lines, government lines, if I could, and support what was happening there. And that actually resulted in being in a small native traditional village called Crow Dog's Paradise. And while I was there, I was dancing and was fed by the women, fry bread and dancing in the circles under the pine boughs and in the sweat lodge. And a young man, native man, Lakota man, came up and said, with a little bit of a bite, he said, "Well, what tribe are you from?" And provocative question. And so the next part of my life was answering that question. And it was discovering my own Indigenous roots, first through music, and then through a colleague, a Celt, crusty old Celt, that said, "Hey, you should take a look at your heritage here. You have some things very, very much in common with Earth spirituality, and a closeness to an abiding by and respect for the planet in your heritage too." So that's kind of what led me eventually to inhabit and search for my own cultural roots and resonance. And I ended up in a place that was very much like Emmett County, named after a Celtic hero. And when I moved here with my partner, there was a bagpipe playing and the Irish dragon, or the Welsh dragon flag flying on the porch, and the land looked as green as Ireland, which I had just returned from. And then I heard about this ancient stone circle, or old stone circle on an island, Irish settled island out in Lake Michigan. And that is Beaver Island. So that's what drew me there. And then the experiences there really deepened my awareness of what's going on that island, both numinous and the hidden dimensions, the intangible cultural dimensions, as well as the what you could see with your eyes.
So how long have you been there on Beaver Island?
Well, I'm a summer resident only, but it stretches back to 94.
Okay.
So quite a few years, 27 or 28, whatever the math says.
Okay. And then are you in Petoskey or that area the rest of the year then?
Yes, right across the pond. And part of the work of Tara's Meadow is to shoreline to kind of the synergy of what the mainland has to offer, and what the island has to offer mainlanders, is being a bridge, being a connector, being a networker is a big part of what I enjoy doing. So.
Hmm. So, I'm going to take a different tactic for just a moment. I'm going to bring these pieces together. This is the Great Lakes Spirituality Project. So, and you've used that word or something similar to it a couple of times in our conversation. How do you understand the word spirituality, or how do you define that?
Yeah, it's for me, it's the intangible dimensions, the energetic dimensions that are not always, manifest that we can see, but they're important. And the probably the most important strong force in the universe, and I'm borrowing from Martin Luther King Jr. is love, and it's much more the binding glue of the universe, and it's the strong force of the universe. And I think, beyond a Hallmark card, and not to denigrate Hallmark at all, but to say that there's a kind of a depth there that energizes the life force. And so spirituality to me, is that the intangibles, and what we do with it, whether it be ritual or worship or activism, those are the kind of the clothing of our spirituality. If we're being congruent with that inner voice, things we do in our life are the clothing, and the activities we do growing out of that spirit.
Sure. Do you think there is a spirituality that is, if not unique, distinctive or characteristic of where you live or of the Great Lakes in general?
Oh boy, yeah, yes, definitely. So my mom, who I just came back from her 102nd birthday,
Oh my goodness! Wow, that's amazing.
and she's the Irish side of my family, and she grew up as a little girl, swimming in that Great Lake long before her mother permitted her to. She swam in the Great Lake, and I have a deep affinity with water. It may sound odd at first take, but that's how I'm grounded, really, or that's primary source of grounded, is being in that mother lake. And so okay, so remind me of your question again.
Yeah. Do you think there is a distinct, if not unique, a distinct
Yes.
spirituality for the where you live specifically, but also the Great Lakes in general?
Definitely, the biodiversity of the Great Lakes, just speaking from an ecological point of view, is huge and wonderful. And we've been impacted heavily in the Great Lakes by industrial forces and brownfields and things like that. But the intactness of it and its specialty there, I mean, we're talking about now UNESCO Biosphere Reserve potential. And there's an effort, which you might be familiar of, to create northern Michigan and the archipelago of Beaver Island as part of a UNESCO reserve,
Mm.
because it is distinct. Beaver Island has a variety of gray toad that exists nowhere else in the world except on that island. And so you have endemic, in the life forms, you have endemic things going on. But also, it's no accident that the Anishinaabe named the islands Manitou. In the Celtic tradition, the islands off the west coast too are also spirit islands, the Tir na Nog. And there is a sense that when you cross water, your soul is making a journey. So every time a pilgrim comes to Beaver Island, we invite them into a process that involves intentionality, an awareness of crossing water, a bringing of a stone of intention, to Tara's Meadow. And that part of the journey and the soul's journey makes this unique and different than so many other places on the planet.
Are there words you would use to describe that spirituality, that sense of connection there?
Oh boy. Wow, that's a really interesting question. I have to probe that one. It's when I think about other places that I've been, and I've spent some time in the Southwest in the desert. Um, the word fluid emerges from the waters here, and what that means. I mean, when my body's in that lake, the support of it, the vastness of it, the freshness of it, just and the fluidity of it are very evident, and the softness of the land here, up in the Canadian Shield, and Puckasaw and other places I've been, it's a different thing. It's harder. The land is harder beneath you, and it's beautiful and it's rugged. Michigan kind of blends that softness with wildness and fluidity and freshness. Dan, you might know Jim Swan's work on sacred places. He's Michigan. I don't know if he's still teaching at U of M, but did a book on sacred places. And there is a specific thing about water and negative ions is one scientific way of talking about what happens when you're near the waves. For the Celts, there's this whole story of the sea foam as the origins of life, and I'm finding that that's also true for the science here. So the Druidic science and Great Lakes science, ocean science, points to that same place of origins. So
I like that. I like that word fluid because it conjures up a lot of, I mean, for me at least, it conjures up a lot of different images and thoughts. But one of them is that sense of flowing over and adapting to, yet not losing the essence of what you are. Um, yeah, it's an interesting word. I like that.
and you saying that, Dan, it's I just brought it to mind, and I apologize, I don't actually know how to turn off my phone.
That's all right. No worries. No worries.
It brings to mind what happens in the meadow and what happens on the island, and this is a unique characteristic of the Great Lakes, especially in the third coastline here. And it's also indigenous to Ireland and of course the Western Atlantic Fringe. It's the fluidity of the mist, water in its other form, and it conceals and it also reveals. And I think that quality of mystery, right, is if you go to the desert again, and I talk about the pueblos there and Acoma and the Tiwa and the other pueblos, there's a different sense of magic, and the air is oftentimes clear and the colors are luminescent in the desert and stark, and that has a kind of radiant light magic. And I think of the mist in the meadow and Tara's Meadow, and what it does and how it conceals and reveals as pretty distinct for us here.
One of the things I think I'd like to do down the line with this project is do a series of pieces on symbols of the Great Lakes and what those represent to us. And mist is not one that I had necessarily thought about, but yet I can think of so many mornings when I've gotten up along the lakes and that just been enveloped by by that fog and that mist, or even just I just remember when I was younger riding the Maid of the Mist boat and Lake by Niagara Falls. You know, so that's an interesting image. Conceals and reveals. I like that.
Neat, neat.
Yeah. So you've mentioned a couple times Tara's Meadow, and I mentioned it at the beginning of our conversation. Why don't you say a little bit more about the work there and what's happening there?
You know, it's a magic place, and the naming of it emerged really from several places. From Tara is a Tibetan goddess of love. It's also the spiritual center of Ireland, and you know, its cognate word means star and tree and crossing over. Lots of really juicy meanings to Tara, and yet the word is irrevocable and undeniable, you know, as all those things are to describe, you know, our place. It didn't come from there. It came from a young woman who lives on the island, who was picking up bits of glass, probably in the mist, you know, when she was on road cleanup as in high school. And she was transported to a community that actually Tars Meadow is the inheritor of. There's a community there, a sawmill community, and people live there. They raise their children. It wasn't just a workplace, it was a place to sing and dance. Now, when this woman, Tara Palmer, was picking up bits of glass, she had a vision in which she saw the people dancing and singing who had once occupied the meadow. Well, many years later, I had elders come to the meadow, and I'm talking about like 20 years later, who had been there at the time, and they'd worked there as, actually they'd been grandchildren. They had worked there. Their father, James Carpenter and Maddie Carpenter, had been the stewards of the meadow when it was a community. And they came there in the rain and were picking up bits of glass. And, you know, and I was out there with them, and one of them came up to me and she said, "Well, how did you come to name this Tara's Meadow?" And I told them about Tara Palmer's vision of seeing people dancing and singing in the meadow. And this woman, Mary Carpenter, looked me straight in the eye and she said, "That was us. We
Mm.
always sang and we always danced in the meadow." So, you know, that once again, that dimension and that through line of spirit, you know, that has led to, you know, what we do at Tara's Meadow is really invite people to sleep in the meadow and to place a stone of intention there. And then we may be doing any kinds of things. There are college students putting up their hammocks and then going out on the land and creating stories is oftentimes one of the first things we invite them to do, as stories from the land. Kind of cultivating a sense of ownership, in that sense of, this is where I eat, this is where I sleep, this is where water is. And then moving out from that circle, maybe they'll be working with, a lot of our students work with the broader island and sustainability measures with the Conservancy, with the Historical Society. So that's one dimension. We do the educational work, that eco-literacy. And we also grow people in the sense of encouraging them and setting the framework to step into the fruition of their own empowerment. So we may do that. We've done maypole ceremonies. The Native Odawa have participated in drumming for that. You know, it's a place to build community, place to be eco-literate, to learn our sense of all my relations. and a place in the broader sense to network with environmental and sustainability endeavors to, take that out in the world from Taras.
Yeah. So you've been in that area for, I think you said 26, 27 years, somewhere in there. And certainly the last 2, 3 decades, we've seen a lot of an acceleration of climate change. And that's been in the headlines, obviously, with the Glasgow COP26 gathering. And so I'm just curious, in your time on Beaver Island and in Petoskey there, have you seen changes to the climate in that little micro ecosystem area there over that time period?
Yes, very definitely. And when I got to Taras Meadow and got to Beaver Island, you know, there were ticks, but I never saw them. They were, the vet tells me there were, and just the migration of ticks into the arena, the effects of the lake variations, and the waves, which apparently the hydrology, has been affected and will be affected by the increased water budget, the lake effect rain and lake effect snow. I've seen a lot of fluctuations. The island kind of has a lot of fluctuations, naturally speaking, in terms of populations of insects and populations of squirrels and things like that. What I've seen is those can burst, and then 3 years later, the squirrels are nearly all gone. Mange has gotten them, and that's kind of natural to the island. But what is kind of different now is we're more concerned about fire and drought than before, and some frogs, the diminishment population of frogs, and there are some remnant species on the islands that we're very aware that are not, they're almost gone from the mainland. The rusty patch bumblebee and the Heinz emerald dragonfly, some things. I've not seen bullfrogs at all. And a diminishment in terms of the number, anecdotally, the numbers of lightning bugs, though we still have that beautiful presence. When I was a boy, I remembered in Wisconsin, the other side of the lake, trees just coated with monarch butterflies, and I haven't seen anything like that since. Though we do have monarchs in the meadow, and they do nest, and it's beautiful. If you have that memory of abundance in the past, there's been a decline.
Well, with climate change accelerating, and us facing so many issues like the ones you had just mentioned and more, do you think there's a role that spirituality plays in the mitigation of climate change, the adaptation to climate change?
Oh boy, most definitely. I think it's central. When my colleague and I, Carrie Finlayson, created our environmental sustainability studies program at North Central Michigan College, we were very aware and are very aware this comes from the holistic spirit. And, in academia, that means interdisciplinary, right? That's the word people use. But to, strip our efforts of that intangible quality of spirit, that sense of lineage, kinship with the earth, and to strip it away leads us to a barren landscape of the mind, and technology that, we don't have that rooting and grounding, that, that North Star that keeps us, acting in harmony. We can get, the mad scientist that creates um, the problem, to solve another problem and creates a bigger problem. So that's what I've admired about Indigenous peoples and Celtic heritage is there is an intrinsic listening to the land, listening to the water, that sense of place and heritage, and touching in with that. And so I think without that, I think we're in danger of coming up with solutions to our climate crisis and other crises that are unconsciously leading to other problems. There's a whole set of guidance and right ways of living that Indigenous people feel, that are the North Stars for how we heal those things that need to be healed. Yeah, definitely spirituality is that North Star when it's informed and aware and of place.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, thank you. Well, thank you, Seamus, so much for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk.
It's a great pleasure. Us Celts don't have to be asked to talk. So anytime, Dan, and actually love to get together with you and share a brew sometime with you, or brew to
That would be nice.
and talk more.
That would be great. Well, thanks. You take care.
Thank you. You too.